The vastness of space holds secrets far grander and far more terrifying than the human mind is typically prepared to accept. For centuries, the established cosmology of the solar system has been a comfort, a predictable clockwork of planets orbiting a central star. Yet beneath this veneer of order, deep within the ancient whispers recorded on clay tablets and etched into megalithic structures across the globe, lies the persistent, chilling shadow of a 10th planet, Nibiru. The very name evokes controversy, dismissed by mainstream science as pseudoscientific folklore, a remnant of Sumerian mythology, a cosmic fairy tale spun by the truly desperate. But what if the fairy tale had a velocity? What if the myth possessed a precise, calculable orbit? And what if, in the digital ether of a cutting-edge astronomical system designed to protect Earth, the first undeniable signs of its return began to flicker? Our story begins not in the deserts of Mesopotamia, but in the drafty, book-lined flat of Dr. Alistair Finch, a senior astrophysicist quietly working at Cambridge, though increasingly distanced from the official hierarchy. Dr. Finch, a man in his late 50s whose spectacles often slipped down his nose, giving him a perpetually worried look, was known among his peers for his relentless, almost stubborn dedication to anomalous data. He favored tweed jackets, perpetually smelling of pipe smoke and damp archives, and often muttered about the mediocrity of consensus science. He saw his work not just as charting stars, but as solving cosmic puzzles, ones that sometimes required looking outside the neatly bound textbooks. The tool that brought the Nibiru myth crashing into the 21st century was the Atlas system, the asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system, primarily housed in Hawaii and South Africa, but with data distributed globally to collaborators. Its mission is simple: scan the entire night sky several times a night, specifically hunting for near-Earth objects that pose an immediate impact threat. It is a system built on urgency and precision, designed for the last alert. But the data stream, a ceaseless river of positional metrics and luminosity readings, contained more than just run-of-the-mill space rocks and comets. Dr. Finch had been tracking an unusual cluster of perturbations detected by Atlas in the outer reaches of the Kuiper Belt, far beyond the comfortable orbital paths of Neptune. It wasn't one object, it was a gravitational signature, a subtle but persistent tug on known long-period comets. He spent weeks drinking copious amounts of lukewarm tea, his small office illuminated only by the sickly green glow of his monitors, meticulously filtering out noise, cosmic rays, and instrumental errors. The air in his office was thick with the scent of ancient paper and the metallic tang of obsession. The rain outside, a classic dreary Cambridge drizzle, seemed to mirror the heavy gloom of his hypothesis. He focused on what the Atlas system labeled simply as 3I Atlas, a designation meant for the third interstellar object detected by the system. But this one behaved differently. Unlike Oumuamua or Borisov, which screamed through our system in hyperbolic trajectories, 3I Atlas seemed to be slowing, or more accurately, exhibiting a highly eccentric, deeply elongated elliptical orbit that was currently on the inbound leg. Its speed was inconsistent with solar escape velocity, yet it was moving far too quickly for a standard-bound TNO, trans-Neptunian object. What kept him pinned to his uncomfortable wooden chair was not the object itself, but the gravitational shadow that preceded it. The math was complicated, requiring specialized algorithms he had developed himself to account for the minute, multi-vector gravitational disturbances in the Kuiper Cliff. He had been ridiculed for years for his theories on complex resonant orbits in the deep solar system, theories which suggested massive, unseen gravitational shepherds lurking in the perpetual twilight. Now, his eccentric equations were screaming. They indicated that the perturbation source, the shepherd, was incredibly massive, a colossal body that dwarfed Pluto and possessed a calculated mass several times that of Earth. It was, impossibly, approaching from the solar aphelion, precisely where ancient texts claimed Nibiru resided during its long 3,600-year pilgrimage. The thought made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up, despite the warm humidity of the small electric heater in his flat. He checked the coordinates again, comparing the raw atlas metrics against archived data from the Pan-STARRS survey. The trajectory was unmistakable. The massive object, currently veiled by the dust and gas in the distant Oort cloud, was dragging the smaller, more detectable 3I Atlas along its leading edge, like a pilot fish guiding a colossal shark. The smaller object was the clue. The enormous one, the true Nibiru, remained hidden, yet its gravitational influence was an open book to those who knew how to read the cosmic language. Doctor. Finch pressed his hands against his tired eyes, the fluorescent light of his screen etching geometric patterns onto his retinas. He knew the path he was embarking upon. It wasn't merely a scientific discovery, it was a cultural confrontation, a direct challenge to the comfortable dogma of institutional astronomy. He had a choice: ignore the anomaly, attribute it to measurement error, or simply label it unexplained noise, and retain his comfortable, if marginalized, position. Or he could pull the thread and risk everything. The thrill of true discovery, the possibility of rewriting human history and cosmology in a single stroke, was too potent to ignore. The air crackled with a silent, terrifying potential. What he was seeing, what the algorithms were showing, was not just an incoming planet. It was an alarm bell, a cosmic warning shot fired after millennia of silence. The data was raw, beautiful, and utterly damning. He swirled the dregs of his cold tea. The implications were staggering. If the ancient Sumerians were right, if the Anunnaki, those beings associated with the planet Nibiru, were not merely myths, but passengers of this inbound celestial body, then the detection of its hidden path changed the context of human civilization entirely. It moved from archaeological curiosity to imminent global concern. The question was not if it was coming, but what it would bring with it. If this beginning has already made you rethink everything you thought you knew, imagine what lies ahead. So go on, give us a like and subscribe to the channel right now, because here, every video reveals something few people dare to show. The journey into the depths of this ancient mystery is just beginning, and you wouldn't want to miss the revelations that follow. The calculated mass of the unseen object was perhaps the most unsettling data point. Using the orbital perturbation data from 3I Atlas, Dr. Finch ran complex N-body simulations, accounting for every known gravitational source in the solar system. The results consistently required a dark, distant object with a mass estimated at 5 to 7 times that of Earth to explain the observed disturbances. This wasn't a slightly larger Neptune. This was a colossal, terrestrial-class planet, or perhaps a brown dwarf companion, shrouded in layers of non-reflective material, a perfect, stealth celestial body. The term stealth was critical because it explained why decades of targeted searches for Planet 9 or Planet X had failed to conclusively identify it. It wasn't hiding. It was just incredibly dim, absorbing most incident light and radiating primarily in the deep infrared spectrum, just beyond the sensitivity of many existing surveys. Finch adjusted his battered leather chair, which let out a mournful squeak. The digital interface of the Atlas data stream was crisp and unforgiving. He zoomed in on the vector graphics representing the approaching path. It was highly inclined, coming in at a steep angle relative to the ecliptic plane, a trajectory that was utterly unlike the standard planetary paths. This inclination, often cited in criticisms of the Nibiru hypothesis as an improbable flight path, was, paradoxically, the very thing that protected it from earlier discovery. It bypassed the primary survey regions of the solar system, moving through a vertical, almost perpendicular path. He began the slow, painstaking process of preparing his findings for submission to the Royal Astronomical Society. He knew the risk. Submitting a paper linking serious astrophysical perturbation data to the boogeyman planet of Sumerian myth was professional suicide. He could feel the judgment already, the hushed, condescending tones of his colleagues in the faculty lounge, the snide remarks about going a bit bonkers in his old age. But the data didn't lie, and his responsibility, he believed, was to the truth, not to the comfort of the scientific establishment. He detailed his methodology meticulously, the specific filtering parameters applied to the Atlas raw data, the Monte Carlo simulations used to confirm the statistical validity of the gravitational residuals, and the derived orbital parameters for the shepherd body. He chose neutral terminology, referring to the object simply as a super-Earth-class TNO, avoiding the loaded terms of Nibiru or Planet X initially. But the conclusion was inescapable. A body of this mass, on this trajectory, was inbound towards the inner solar system, and its perihelion passage, the closest approach to the Sun, was projected to occur within a geological heartbeat, perhaps within the next 2 decades. The pressure mounted not just from the academic risk, but from the physical reality of his findings. He started sleeping less, sustained by stale digestives and instant coffee. His flat in a Victorian terrace in Cambridge, usually his sanctuary of quiet contemplation, began to feel like a high-security bunker. Every lorry passing outside, every unfamiliar sound on the street, registered as a potential threat. He was acutely aware that highly sensitive, potentially panic-inducing data about the deep solar system is not solely the property of academics. It is the currency of governments and militaries. If he could find this anomaly using distributed public data, surely the intelligence agencies, with their vastly superior processing power and classified observatories, had already seen it. The very air seemed heavier, charged with the weight of impending disclosure. He spent an entire afternoon meticulously backing up his data onto multiple encrypted hard drives, carefully labeled with innocuous titles like Victorian Poetry Drafts. He knew the moment he hit send on the submission email, his life, and perhaps the world's perception of reality, would fundamentally shift. He felt a deep kinship with the ancient scribes who first recorded the myth of Nibiru. They too must have felt the terror of knowing a celestial truth that others refused to acknowledge. They were reporting what they saw just as he was. The sheer detail required to prove the orbital eccentricity of 3I Atlas demanded hundreds of pages of complex mathematics. Finch didn't just present the outcome, he presented the scaffolding, the struts and beams of his reasoning, determined to leave no room for academic dismissal based on shoddy methodology. He even included a separate supplementary appendix detailing the uncanny alignment of the calculated perihelion timeframe with various cultural end-of-age prophecies, including the Sumerian cycle. This appendix was the professional risk, the intellectual grenade he was tossing into the hallowed halls of the Royal Astronomical Society. As he proofread the final version, the word count ballooning beyond 15,000 words for the paper itself, he paused, looking out his window at the swirling grey clouds, typical of a British autumn afternoon. Was he a Cassandra, delivering an unwanted prophecy, or merely a delusional crackpot confusing statistical anomaly with cosmic doom? The distinction felt incredibly thin at this moment. He remembered the old British saying, "Keep calm and carry on." But how could one keep calm when the very structure of the solar system was being subtly dismantled by an inbound behemoth? If you've made it this far without pausing, it's because this subject truly resonates with you. So, lend this content some strength. Hit the like button now and share this video with someone who desperately needs to see this evidence. Let them decide if this is merely myth or the terrifying truth being whispered in the dark corners of scientific observation. The moment Dr. Finch clicked the send button, A silence descended upon his flat, heavier than the thick fog rolling in off the fens. The paper, titled Anomalous Gravitational Signatures and Highly Inclined Orbit of a Super-Earth-class TNO proxy detected by Atlas data, was now in the hands of the peer review process. Finch knew the system intimately. He anticipated the standard 6-week review period, followed by inevitable requests for clarification, and then perhaps publication. What he received instead was an immediate, chilling response. Within 48 hours, an email arrived from the journal's chief editor, Dr. Harrison Thorne, a man Finch had known professionally for 2 decades. The email was terse, unusually blunt, and lacked the standard diplomatic language of academic rejection. It stated in unambiguous terms that the paper was being rejected prior to peer review due to methodological inconsistencies and the highly speculative nature of the concluding remarks. Thorne added a personal handwritten postscript at the bottom. "Alistair, drop this, immediately, for your own sake." This immediate preemptive rejection was unprecedented. It wasn't just a refusal to publish, it was a warning. Finch's scientific instincts, honed over decades of meticulous work, told him that the rejection wasn't based on merit, but on command. Someone, somewhere, had intercepted the paper the moment it hit the journal's server and issued a non-negotiable directive: silence. Finch attempted to contact Thorne directly, ringing his office and his private mobile phone. Both calls went straight to voicemail. When he tried to contact other members of the editorial board, old friends he trusted implicitly, they were suddenly unavailable, citing unexpected leave or heavy workload. The silence was deafening, a coordinated institutional blockade erected almost instantaneously around his findings. The oppressive feeling of being watched began to creep into his daily routine. While walking the cobbled streets of Cambridge, heading to the local chemist for supplies, he noticed the same unmarked silver saloon car parked down the road near his flat 2 days in a row. He brushed it off initially as paranoia, the inevitable byproduct of chasing cosmic monsters. But the feeling intensified. He was a man of logic, not of baseless anxiety. Yet the logic now pointed to surveillance. He started examining the data logs of his home network. He was, after all, an astrophysicist, meaning he had a strong background in computing and data security. What he found confirmed his deepest fears. Multiple sophisticated attempts to access his system via phishing attempts disguised as administrative university updates, and more troublingly, a persistent, low-level data siphon operating on a hidden port in his fiber optic connection. The digital fingerprints of the intruder were extremely clean, suggesting a state actor or a highly funded private security firm, certainly not amateur hackers. The discovery galvanized him. If they were trying this hard to steal the data, it meant 2 things. First, the data was undeniably correct, and second, they were terrified of public disclosure. The "they" remained abstract, a faceless bureaucracy operating in the shadows of Whitehall, likely involving MI5 or perhaps GCHQ, the government communications headquarters, which had access to surveillance capabilities far exceeding anything an academic could counter. Finch decided he couldn't use the university facilities anymore. He retrieved his paper copies and encrypted drives and relocated his operational base to a tiny, sparsely furnished rental flat above a chippy in a less conspicuous part of the city. The aroma of vinegar and frying batter was a sharp contrast to the antiseptic air of the university labs, but the anonymity provided a necessary shield. He purchased a new, disconnected laptop for his calculations and began running the numbers again, using different algorithms, different source material, archived data from non-Atlas systems, just to ensure he wasn't mad. Every calculation returned the same result: 5 to 7 Earth masses, highly inclined orbit, inbound trajectory, a perihelion passage looming. The object was real, massive and headed our way. He pored over the details of the Sumerian texts again, studying translations of the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation myth that describes the planet Tiamat being shattered by Marduk, often identified with Jupiter or Nibiru. The details were too specific to be coincidence. The Sumerians spoke of a winged disk, or a planet of the crossing, that entered the inner system, causing chaos and astronomical disturbances every 3,600 years. The orbital period Finch's calculations suggested, an immensely long, eccentric path, matched the ancient cycle with terrifying precision. What was the connection? Were the Sumerians, who possessed surprisingly advanced astronomical knowledge for their era, simply recording a genuinely observed celestial event, passed down through oral tradition, eventually being mythologized? Or, as the more radical theories suggest, were the Anunnaki, those who from heaven to earth came, the intelligence aboard the planet returning to their terrestrial outpost after a long sojourn in the void? He shuddered, pulling his worn cardigan tighter. The transition from pure science to mythological investigation felt like crossing a forbidden boundary, yet the gravitational perturbations were the only things linking the two worlds. He was caught between verifiable physics and the forbidden language of ancient gods. He realized the institutions weren't protecting the public from panic. They were protecting an established worldview that could not accommodate returning gods or cataclysmic cosmic cycles. The stakes were no longer just professional, they were existential. The sheer volume of his work, the thousands of hours, the hundreds of complex simulations, all pointed to this single, world-shattering conclusion. His new flat was noisy and cramped, the small kitchen smelling perpetually of grease, but it offered insulation from the prying eyes of the academic world. He laid out dozens of printed orbital charts on the sticky countertop, drawing connections with red ink. The 3-eye Atlas object was currently approaching the orbit of Uranus. It was still incredibly far, moving at immense velocity, but it was gaining momentum, accelerating under the gravitational well of the Sun. The sheer scale of the calculations necessary to maintain the fidelity of the trajectory over decades was immense, demanding computational resources Finch barely possessed. He was constantly struggling against the limit of his old, overworked machine. What did the establishment fear most? Was it the social collapse triggered by the news, or the potential geopolitical instability if certain nations realized that advanced warning could translate into survival strategies? The official silence was a calculated act of control, and that control, Finch suspected, was far more elaborate than simple press releases. This journey through the shadows of official denial and into the complex science of gravitational physics is designed to challenge your perception of reality. Have you ever considered the possibility of a cosmic cycle this massive? If you have, or if this has genuinely shaken your foundations, then strengthen this content. Hit that like button now and forward this to someone who needs to question the status quo. Write in the comments, "The silence is the signal," just so I know you are truly following this intricate thread of cosmic conspiracy. To truly understand the implications of the Atlas discovery, Finch realized he needed to move beyond pure astrophysics and delve into the muddy waters of historical revisionism. He understood the ridicule he faced, but the numerical convergence between his calculations and the ancient timelines was too exact to ignore. He arranged a clandestine meeting with a retired, highly controversial historian, Professor Evelyn Reed, known for her fringe theories linking Sumerian astrology to advanced mathematical knowledge. The meeting took place in the dusty, quiet reading room of a lesser-known London museum library, one afternoon when the building was mostly deserted, the only sounds being the ticking of a grandfather clock and the rustle of brittle paper. Evelyn Reed was a sharp, elderly woman, impeccably dressed in a tailored wool suit, her eyes twinkling with a defiance that mirrored Finch's own. She was delighted rather than dismayed by his hypothesis. Finch presented his orbital analysis, detailing the 3,600-year period and the highly inclined trajectory. Reed, in turn, produced photographic copies of cuneiform tablets, focusing on the specialized lexicon used by Sumerian astronomers. She explained the concept of Sa, the primary cyclical unit often translated as 3,600 years, linked explicitly to the passage of Emul Dili, the singular bright star that was sometimes obscured or winged. "They weren't just recording myths, Alistair," Evelyn whispered, her voice husky with age and excitement. "They were recording observational data, overlaid with theological interpretation. The Anunnaki weren't gods in the sense we understand them. They were travelers, observers, engineers. Their home, Nibiru, was their transportation." She showed him diagrams etched into clay, primitive yet strikingly accurate representations of the solar system, where the relative sizes and distances of the known planets were depicted with unusual fidelity, right up until the inclusion of an enormous dark orb designated as the 12th planet, counting the sun and moon. What fascinated Finch was not the presence of the planet, but its symbol. A stylized cross or a wheel, often interpreted by modern scholars merely as a symbol of sovereignty. Reed argued it was a trajectory marker indicating a crossing of the ecliptic plane. Finch felt a visceral connection between the two disparate fields. The gravitational math of the 21st century Atlas system was confirming the astronomical observations of 6,000 years ago. The Sumerians knew exactly what they were seeing, and they meticulously encoded the knowledge into their creation stories to ensure its survival, recognizing that raw astronomical data would be corrupted or dismissed over millennia. The conversation drifted to the potential consequences of Nibiru's approach. Evelyn explained that the Sumerian texts, particularly those detailing the flood myth, suggested that Nibiru's immense gravitational pull created planetary instability, leading to colossal tsunamis, massive shifts in Earth's crust, and extreme volcanic activity. The planet itself might not strike Earth, but its passage would be like dragging a colossal magnet through a delicate clockwork mechanism. As Finch walked back towards the tube station, clutching his briefcase filled with photocopied tablets and his own cryptic notes, the feeling of being hunted intensified. He caught the reflection of the same silver saloon in a shop window, two figures inside, motionless. They weren't just observing, they were waiting for him to make a mistake. He felt the cold realization that he was no longer an academic pursuing an abstract truth. He was a threat, a carrier of viral, destabilizing information. He decided to go entirely off-grid. He ditched his mobile phone in a rubbish bin near Waterloo Station and took a circuitous route of 3 different tube lines designed to confuse any electronic tracking. He felt ridiculous, a respected astrophysicist playing a low-stakes spy game on the grimy transport network of London. Yet the stakes felt anything but low. Back in his flat, the smell of vinegar and chips was now a comforting, anonymous scent. He set up a Faraday cage around his new computer setup using aluminium foil and duct tape, a crude but effective way to block external radio frequency monitoring. He settled down to synthesize the historical and scientific data. The synthesis was terrifyingly cohesive. The Atlas data provided the how and when. The Sumerian texts provided the what and why. The Anunnaki alert was not a fictional construct. It was a reality spanning 6 millennia, finally triggered by modern technology. The Sumerian accounts described the Anunnaki returning to Earth specifically to mine gold, which they allegedly needed to repair their planetary atmosphere, depleted by the long, deep space journey. The proximity of Nibiru's orbit to Earth's and the timing of its return wasn't just astronomical. It was a matter of resource logistics. The complexity of the narrative required immense intellectual gymnastics to maintain scientific objectivity while dealing with mythological sources. Finch wrote pages upon pages, meticulously footnoted, comparing gravitational models with mythological descriptions of cosmic battles. He detailed how the immense magnetic field of a planet 7 times the size of Earth could disrupt our own, causing geomagnetic storms and widespread failure of electrical infrastructure long before the planet itself became visible to the naked eye. The danger was not impact, but chaos. The planet was a precursor to global societal breakdown. The silence from the institutions, the coordinated denial, suddenly made cold, cynical sense. They weren't worried about the future. They were worried about the present, about maintaining order until the last possible moment. The stress was eroding Finch's usually robust physical health. He hadn't seen the sun properly in days. His face, reflected in the small bathroom mirror, was pale and gaunt. He felt the weight of history on his shoulders, the responsibility of warning a world determined to remain blissfully ignorant. He knew he couldn't keep this information confined to a secret document forever. He needed an ally, someone outside the direct purview of the British establishment, someone who understood both the physics and the politics of cosmic disclosure. He thought of Dr. Eldon Vance, a former student who had gone on to work at the European Space Agency, ESA, specifically in data analysis and risk assessment, before abruptly resigning 3 years prior under mysterious circumstances. She had always shared Finch's skeptical view of consensus science and possessed a brilliant, unconventional mind. She now ran a small, independent consulting firm focusing on orbital mechanics in Edinburgh. She was distant, professional, and crucially operating outside the jurisdiction of Whitehall's direct academic control. The intersection of modern science and ancient myth is where the truth often hides. Are you prepared to accept that our history books might be fundamentally flawed, concealing a cyclical threat? If this depth of research is compelling, then strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and forward this to someone who needs to question the official narratives. Write in the comments, Nibiru is real, just so I know you're truly following this intricate thread of cosmic conspiracy. Meanwhile, in a sterile, windowless office deep within a government building in central London, a location known only by its code name, the Citadel, the security detail monitoring Dr. Alistair Finch was escalating their operations. The team was a hybrid unit, unofficially combining elements of MI6's strategic intelligence analysis and GCHQ's deep cyber surveillance, reporting directly to a secretive body known internally only as the Celestial Contingency Committee, CCC. Their objective was clear: contain the data leak, discredit Finch, and neutralize the narrative before it gained traction. They referred to the anomaly not as Nibiru, but simply as the Asset, or CCC-X. Leading the containment operation was Commander Marcus Thorne, no relation to the editor, but sharing the same ruthless efficiency. Thorne was a former Royal Navy officer, now an intelligence operative, whose job was managing threats that fell outside the standard geopolitical scope. He sat hunched over multiple monitors, watching the live feeds that tracked Finch's movements and digital footprints. "He dumped his mobile phone," reported a young analyst, her voice crisp and emotionless. "Using the Northern Line, classic misdirection. He's operating on a clean machine now, running Linux and using an air-gapped network for the heavy calculations. We lost the persistent siphon when he moved flats." Thorne tapped a pen against his desk, the sound sharp in the quiet room. "The flat above the chippy, confirmed." "Confirmed, Commander. Smell of deep-fried anything is overwhelming, but he's running complex simulations. He's confirming the 3600-year perihelion. And worse, he's cross-referencing with Reed's historical data. He's making the jump to Anunnaki." Thorne sighed, a sound of immense frustration. "I warned Harrison that Finch was a liability. Academics and their ethical principles. They can't grasp the macro risk. Public panic over a 20-year horizon event would cause an immediate, catastrophic societal collapse. Food riots, governmental failure. It's better they think the sky is clear until we have a viable containment strategy. The CCCC's primary concern wasn't the planet itself yet, but the resulting chaos. They believed that only total secrecy could guarantee the necessary control needed to execute their long-term survival plans that involved building deep underground bunkers, referred to cryptically as arks, for key personnel and maintaining functional governance. Disclosing the truth meant losing control of the population and their labor pool for the construction of these arks. Thorne ordered a more aggressive approach. Digital disruption is insufficient. We need a physical containment vector. Access the flat, retrieve all hard drives, but make it look like a standard burglary. No heavy-handed MI5 signature. Make him look paranoid, not victimized. Finch, oblivious to the imminent physical threat, was engrossed in preparing his travel plans. He had secured a train ticket to Edinburgh, paid for in cash at a non-CCTV guarded station kiosk. He decided against flying, fearing the standardized passenger manifests and centralized security tracking. The train, the slow, meandering East Coast main line, offered better opportunities for anonymity. He meticulously packed his essentials: a thermos flask, a couple of battered paperbacks, and most importantly, 3 small, highly robust memory sticks containing the entirety of his analysis, carefully concealed in the false bottom of a tin of stale biscuits. He wore layers of inconspicuous clothing, a dark wool coat, grey trousers, and solid leather shoes, designed to blend into the general commuter aesthetic of a dreary British winter. He felt the heavy weight of isolation. He hadn't spoken to his family in days, knowing that any contact would immediately compromise them. The life he had built, the respected academic career, the predictable Cambridge routine, was now shattered, replaced by the grim necessity of survival and disclosure. He was an accidental whistleblower, propelled by gravity and ancient history. As he checked his flat one last time, ensuring that the scent of vinegar and chips was the only remaining evidence of his occupation, he paused by the window. The silver saloon was gone. A sudden cold fear gripped him. They weren't watching, they were moving. They had detected his planned departure. He snatched his briefcase and hurried out the door, descending the narrow, rickety staircase of the flat. He didn't lock the door. Time was now his critical resource. He calculated the distance to the train station, the time until departure, and the necessary speed to avoid interception. He felt the cold air hit him as he stepped onto the pavement. The scent of the sea carried in the damp air, a brief, stark reminder of the larger world he was fighting to save. Minutes after Finch left, a black, unmarked van pulled up silently outside the terrace. 2 operatives, wearing dark, nondescript clothing and thick gloves, slipped into the alleyway. They scaled the back fire escape with practiced ease. The lack of a locked door was an immediate confirmation of Finch's hasty departure. Inside the flat, the operatives performed a rapid professional sweep. They ignored the cheap furniture and the outdated electronics, focusing only on storage and data. They found the main computer, the air-gapped Linux machine, and wiped the hard drive using a powerful magnet, reducing all the calculations to useless digital static. They searched every shelf, every drawer, finding nothing of substance. "He's clean, boss," one operative reported via a secure comms link. "All digital copies are sterile, but we found the note." The note was a scrap of paper left taped to the wall, deliberately placed to look like a forgotten reminder. It was a single, cryptic phrase, a quote from the Sumerian king list. The kingship was lowered from heaven. Thorne, listening back at the citadel, swore softly. "He's taunting us. He's taking the data physically. Track his movements. He's headed north. Check all major transport hubs. Use facial recognition. Do not let him reach Scotland." The operation had failed to secure the primary asset, the memory sticks, and now Finch was loose, heading towards a highly independent, less controllable jurisdiction. The lengths to which established powers will go to preserve control are often astonishing. Do you believe the official narrative is designed to protect you or to manage your compliance? If this high-stakes narrative has gripped your attention, then strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and forward this to someone who needs to see the machinery of denial in action. Write in the comments, "The kingship was lowered," just so I know you are truly following this intricate thread of cosmic conspiracy. The train ride north was a blur of dreary English countryside flashing past the windows, cows grazing in damp fields, industrial estates shrouded in mist. Finch tried to relax, but his paranoia was a constant buzzing companion. He chose a seat in the last carriage, facing backwards, allowing him to scan the length of the carriage and the platform whenever the train paused at a provincial station like Peterborough or York. He pulled out the only item he allowed himself to read, the photocopied Sumerian texts. He studied the detailed descriptions of the ephemeris, the celestial tables, that meticulously tracked the movement of the planet of the crossing. He noted the Sumerian emphasis on the gravitational relationship between Nibiru and the outer gas giants, particularly Jupiter and Saturn. His original calculations, confirmed by his recent air-gapped simulations, suggested that Nibiru utilized a gravitational slingshot maneuver around Jupiter during its inbound journey. This meant its trajectory was highly dependent on the current alignment of the gas giant, a factor the ancient astronomers somehow seemed to have accounted for. This level of predictive astronomy was supposed to be impossible for a civilization that lacked advanced optics and Newtonian mechanics. It implied either inherited knowledge from an advanced source, the Anunnaki themselves, or a level of mathematical genius that defied conventional historical timelines. Finch considered the implications of the slingshot. If the calculation of the trajectory was off by even a fraction of a degree, the proximity of Nibiru's passage could shift dramatically. A closer approach meant catastrophic tidal forces, overwhelming volcanic eruptions, and massive atmospheric stripping. The 3,600-year cycle was a probabilistic average, not a guarantee. The current cycle, according to his projections, was slightly tighter than the historical average. Finch arrived in Edinburgh, the towering Gothic architecture of the city a welcome change from the flat familiarity of Cambridge. He arranged to meet Dr. Eleanor Vance at a small independent coffee house near the Old Town, a place known for its excellent selection of Scottish shortbread and its low tourist profile. Dr. Vance, a woman in her early 40s with sharp, intelligent eyes and vibrant red hair pulled back tightly, was waiting for him. She was dressed practically in layers of cashmere and tweed, blending seamlessly into the affluent academic crowd. They exchanged a brief professional nod. "Alistair," she greeted, her voice carrying a slight musical Edinburgh lilt. "You look dreadful, like you've been living on stale biscuits and fear." "Eleanor, the data is compelling. I need your eyes on it." "I can't trust anyone else in the South," Finch replied, setting down his briefcase. They ordered tea and shortbread, a veneer of normality shielding a conversation of cosmic gravity. Finch pulled out the memory sticks and handed her the tin of biscuits. "It's all in here. Encrypted 256-bit AES. You know the key," he stated. "It's the Atlas data, filtered for persistent perturbations, cross-referenced with archived pan-stars and ESA archival telemetry. It's the super-Earth. It's inbound." "And Eleanor, the orbit matches the Sumerian SAR cycle." Eleanor's professional composure wavered slightly. She worked in orbital mechanics. She understood the difficulty of faking gravitational residuals on this scale. If the data held up, it was the single biggest discovery and threat in human history. She meticulously avoided touching the memory sticks, instead discussing the data abstractly, referencing the known parameters of hypothetical Planet 9 searches. "The issue with Planet 9 searches," Eleanor explained, stirring her tea slowly, "is that everyone assumes a low inclination. They are searching along the ecliptic plane. If this body is highly inclined, coming in almost vertically, most surveys would miss it until it hits the inner solar system. Precisely, Finch confirmed. The only reason Atlas picked up 3I Atlas is that it was dragged along by the primary mass, and the secondary object is moving slightly less inclined, giving us the window. But the primary, the true Nibiru, is virtually invisible. They discussed the technical challenges for hours. Eleanor raised points about magnetic field interactions and how the sheer mass of the object could induce electrical currents in Earth's core, accelerating the polar shift predicted by some fringe geophysicists. Their conversation moved fluidly between the rigorous physics of orbital decay and the unsettling theological implications of returning gods. Eleanor confirmed that she, too, had noticed the extreme tightness of institutional control over large-scale astronomical data in the past 3 years, correlating with her own mysterious resignation. She theorized that the CCC was fully aware of Nibiru's approach, perhaps since the turn of the millennium, and had been systematically sanitizing the data streams to prevent any leaks. They're preparing, Alistair. They're not denying because they are ignorant. They are denying because they are prioritizing their own survival over global disclosure, Eleanor concluded, finishing her tea. The moment we publish this, we become targets, not academics. We're challenging the foundational authority of the state. The level of coordination required for a global cover-up of this magnitude implies a terrifying level of state preparation. What does it mean for us, the general public, if the government's priority is secrecy over survival? If you are captivated by this unveiling of hidden truths, then strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and forward this to someone who needs to see the machinery of denial in action. Write in the comments, "The arcs are real," just so I know you are truly following this intricate thread of cosmic conspiracy. Eleanor took the data back to her own small, secure office in Edinburgh, a space above a traditional Scottish bookbinder, far from the influence of London intelligence. She spent the next 48 hours running Finch's algorithms against her own proprietary data analysis tools, pushing her powerful local server to its limits. The office smelled of old leather and new technology, a fitting atmosphere for blending ancient fears with modern calculations. Her goal was not merely to confirm Finch's trajectory, but to refine it. Finch's work was robust, but it relied heavily on the raw Atlas feed. Eleanor had access to archived data from independent European observatories that often captured peripheral observations excluded from the centralized US-led surveys. She focused specifically on faint, low-luminosity objects reported in the 1990s and 2000s that had subsequently been lost or dismissed as instrumentation noise. What she found was startling corroboration. Several independent faint infrared detections from the late 90s, originating from the precise area of the sky Finch had identified as the object's origin point, showed a massive, non-solar body moving at immense yet consistent velocity. These lost observations, now recalibrated using modern processing techniques, solidified the orbital path. They proved that Nibiru, or CCC-X, was moving along a predictable yet highly eccentric path, consistent with the 3,600-year cycle. The hidden path revealed itself as a combination of 3 factors: extreme inclination, making it invisible to most surveys; immense distance combined with a dark, non-reflective surface, making it undetectable in the visible spectrum; and the highly eccentric orbit that kept it moving incredibly slowly at aphelion and accelerating only upon approach to the inner system. It wasn't hidden in the sense of being deliberately cloaked by an external intelligence, but rather hidden by the physics of its own trajectory. Eleanor was particularly focused on the orbital mechanics around the closest approach, the perihelion. Finch had predicted the passage would occur near the orbit of Mars. Eleanor's refined calculations, incorporating the historical lost data, shifted the predicted path slightly closer to Earth's orbit, though still maintaining a safe distance of approximately 0.5 AU, astronomical units. However, the margin of error was terrifyingly small. A minor gravitational nudge from an unforeseen asteroid belt mass, or even a slight variation in the Sun's magnetic field over the next decade, could shorten the distance significantly. A passage closer than zero. AU, less than 10 million miles, would guarantee catastrophic tidal and volcanic events on Earth. Eleanor contacted Finch via a heavily encrypted VoIP line, masking her location through layers of virtual private networks that made her signal appear to be bouncing from a dodgy internet cafe in Reykjavik. "Alistair, I've confirmed the trajectory," she reported, her voice low and tense. "But the uncertainty in the perihelion distance is worrying. We have to assume the worst-case scenario, a major gravitational disruption. The forces exerted by a 7-Earth mass body at 0.5 AU are immense, enough to cause a 15-meter tidal surge globally, even without an impact." Finch listened, seated on the edge of his temporary bed in a cheap Edinburgh hostel. "The cover-up makes perfect sense then, Eleanor. They know a 15-meter surge wipes out every coastal city and destroys 80% of global infrastructure. They can't manage that panic." "Exactly. Their focus isn't planetary defense, it's resource allocation and population control," Eleanor confirmed. "We need to get this information out immediately. The time to prepare for tidal surges and geomagnetic storms is now, not when the object is visible to backyard astronomers." They realized the limitations of their position. They were two rogue scientists against the combined intelligence apparatus of the UK and likely the US. Publishing in a journal was futile. The paper would be instantly retracted and the authors ridiculed. They needed a strategic, high-impact leak, a way to disseminate the raw data directly to the global community of independent astronomers and data scientists, forcing the official agencies to respond. The decision was made. They would package the raw, confirmed Atlas data, Eleanor's archival corroboration, and Finch's refined orbital model into a single comprehensive data packet. They would use an incredibly high level of encryption and distribute it via multiple anonymous servers to highly targeted individuals globally, not to the press, but to trusted independent researchers in places like India, Germany, and Brazil, places less susceptible to direct MI6 pressure. The goal was to achieve critical mass of verification before the data could be suppressed. This is where the academic pursuit turns into a critical act of rebellion against the state's monopoly on cosmic knowledge. Do you believe the scientific community has the responsibility to disclose all truths, even those that cause panic? If this relentless pursuit of hidden data grips you, then strengthen this content. Hit the like button now and forward this to someone who needs to see the machinery of denial in action. Write in the comments, "The data must live," just so I know you are truly following this intricate thread of cosmic conspiracy. Back in the Citadel, Commander Thorne was furious. Finch and Vance were now collaborating, moving the threat from a single contained academic source to a networked, sophisticated data dispersal operation. Their failure to secure Finch's memory sticks meant the core data was now refined and corroborated. "We need to neutralize Finch's credibility immediately," Thorne demanded. "Launch the smear campaign. Use his past theoretical work, the discredited gravitational shepherd theories, and link it to his current Nibiru obsession. Plant articles in the major papers. Make him look like an academic crank who has finally tipped over the edge." Within hours, the carefully orchestrated campaign began. Anonymous sources, identified vaguely as senior university colleagues, began leaking selective, disparaging information about Finch's mental stability and his decade-long obsession with ancient alien theories. A piece appeared in the Times detailing his rejection by the RAS and hinting that his recent research was spurred by financial instability and psychological distress. The term cosmic crackpot became a recurring phrase on science blogs that were suspiciously amplified by automated social media accounts. Finch saw the articles online in a local library using a slow public terminal. The sight of his reputation being systematically dismantled was painful, but expected. They were attacking the messenger because they couldn't refute the message. He felt a chilling certainty. The cover-up was complete at the narrative level. The world was being inoculated against the truth by mass media ridicule. This public attack had a silver lining. It confirmed that the CCC was focused on character assassination, meaning they had not yet found Eleanor's specific location in Edinburgh, nor had they intercepted the prepared data packet. The key now was speed and precision. Eleanor, isolated in her office, was performing the final checks on the massive data packet, a detailed 50-gigabyte file containing all the raw telemetry, the calculation engines, and a concise summary document in 5 languages. She used a highly complex blockchain-based security system to time-lock the release, ensuring that if she were intercepted or compromised, the data would automatically release to the predetermined network of independent scientists at a set time. She meticulously detailed the evidence for the gravitational shepherd body, Nibiru, and the specific orbital path of the tracer body, 3I Atlas. She ensured that every data point was traceable to its public or archive source, making the refutation difficult without admitting to data manipulation. The sheer volume of words required to detail the orbital calculations, the statistical analysis, and the historical correlations was staggering. Eleanor included appendices containing hundreds of pages of graphs plotting the subtle shifts in the orbits of minor planets in the Kuiper belt, demonstrating the collective gravitational influence of a major unseen body. She wrote in clinical, objective prose, refusing to use mythological terms, sticking instead to super-Earth TNOX, and extremely highly inclined object. She knew that by finalizing this leak, she was sacrificing her remaining career, her financial security, and potentially her freedom. Yet looking at the complex, elegant equations that predicted global upheaval, she felt a profound sense of duty. The truth, however inconvenient or terrifying, was owed to humanity. Finch travelled back down to northern England, settling temporarily in a remote B&B in the Yorkshire Dales, far from urban surveillance. He felt the cold, hard isolation of his mission. He spent his time reviewing the projected timeline for Nibiru's approach. The object was currently estimated to be approximately 250 AU distant, hurtling inwards. It would enter the inner Oort cloud boundary within 5 years, and the crucial point, where its gravity would begin to significantly influence the Earth's magnetic field and tectonic plates, was estimated to be 10 years out. The perihelion passage itself was calculated for 2042. 10 years was barely enough time for global infrastructure to be reinforced against tidal events and magnetic field collapse. He imagined the coming decade, the slow, creeping dread as amateur astronomers, armed with better telescopes, finally started confirming his findings. The inevitable catastrophic collapse of governmental authority when the official denial became untenable. He was giving the world a chance, a decade of warning. He stared out at the harsh, beautiful landscape of the Dales, the wind whipping across the moors. He was fighting for the chance for humanity to prepare, to look up, and to acknowledge the cyclical, terrifying reality of cosmic history. Eleanor finished the data packaging, securing the leak to trigger in 72 hours. She then performed a crucial, symbolic act. She sent an anonymous, encrypted email to Dr. Harrison Thorne, the journal editor who had rejected Finch's paper. The email contained only a link to the publicly available Atlas data stream and a single sentence: "You should have published." She knew this would raise the alarm back at the Citadel, confirming their worst fears. The data was confirmed, and the collaborators were proceeding with the leak. If this content has opened your mind to the true scale of what might be hidden from us, please comment below. I reached the end. This helps us understand who is truly seeking knowledge beyond the surface. Give the video a like, subscribe to the channel right now, and activate the notification bell, because the next episodes will dive even deeper into the global survival plans of the Celestial Contingency Committee. And don't leave without clicking on the next video. It is the logical continuation of this terrifying journey. Trust me, you won't want to stop here. Eleanor's subtle digital taunt to Dr. Thorne had the desired effect. The Citadel immediately went into high alert. Commander Thorne realized that their counter-narrative of Finch being a crackpot was only effective if the data remained hidden. A flood of raw, verifiable data would instantly expose their lies and validate Finch's obsession. Thorne immediately contacted his counterparts in the US, specifically NORAD and NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and in Russia, Roscosmos, and China, CNSA. The cover-up, it was revealed, was truly global, a silent cross-cultural agreement among world powers to manage the impending crisis secretly. The consensus was that public knowledge would lead to anarchy, thus jeopardizing the construction of the arcs, the deep underground facilities designed to house essential personnel and preserve civilization's core knowledge. The global directive was simple. Verify Eleanor's IP address, intercept the leak before the 72-hour timer expired, and if interception failed, launch an immediate, overwhelming data counteroffensive to saturate the internet with fabricated orbital models, effectively burying the truth in a sea of digital noise. Eleanor knew she was now exposed. She saw the telltale digital signatures, rapid, high-volume probes hitting her network perimeter, tracing the Reykjavik VPN bounce point. She was being located. She spent her remaining hours drafting a final personal message to accompany the data packet. She wrote about the profound beauty and terror of the universe, and the moral responsibility of scientists to disclose truth, regardless of the consequences. She framed the Anunnaki myth not as a religious text, but as a historical warning system, designed by those who had witnessed the previous cycles of cosmic upheaval. She emphasized that the returning planet was simply physics, not destiny, and that preparation was the only viable response. She packed a small rucksack, a couple of changes of clothes, some emergency rations, and a robust satellite phone, registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. She had made arrangements to disappear into the vast, sparsely populated highlands of Scotland, a place where surveillance becomes vastly more difficult. Just as she was disconnecting her physical server from the internet connection, preparing to flee, the heavy oak door of the bookbinder's shop below her office was violently splintered. Eleanor heard the heavy boots on the steep wooden staircase. She didn't panic. She had anticipated this moment. She quickly executed the final command. Release the data. Confirmation. Data packet 734X dispersed. The 50 GB file, containing the evidence of Nibiru's hidden path, was now bouncing across the globe, simultaneously uploaded to dozens of independent astronomical forums, encrypted file-sharing networks, and the private servers of the targeted scientists. The 72-hour timer was circumvented. The urgency of the threat necessitated immediate action. The door to her office burst open. Two large men in dark jackets, clearly intelligence operatives, stormed the small room, weapons drawn. They were too late. "The data is out," Eleanor stated calmly, holding her hands up. The air was thick with the scent of ozone and burning computer circuits. She had ensured the server was physically damaged the moment the data left, preventing them from tracing the dissemination vectors. The operatives quickly subdued her, securing her with plastic restraints. They searched the room frantically, attempting to find any residual data storage. They found only smoke and the pervasive smell of old leather. Finch, listening to the BBC World Service in his Yorkshire B&B, heard a brief, strange news report. Police are investigating a severe break-in at a small business premises in Edinburgh, possibly linked to a commercial data dispute. He knew instantly. Eleanor had been compromised, but the phrase break-in suggested the intelligence agencies were still maintaining the facade of mundane crime. He also knew that if they had caught her, the data must be out. Eleanor would never have let herself be taken before launching the packet. He powered up his satellite phone and sent a pre-composed cryptic message to his most trusted contact within the international amateur astronomy community, a retired technician in the Canary Islands named Miguel. Check Sector 37 Gamma. 3i data confirmed. Look for the massive shadow. This wasn't the main leak, but a signal flare confirming the authenticity of the flood of information that was about to hit the internet. The battle for disclosure was now officially engaged. The silence was broken, but the fight to make people believe the catastrophic truth had just begun. The moment data packet 734X hit the global network, the reaction was immediate and fragmented. The highly encrypted file landed on the servers of dozens of international physicists, orbital mechanics specialists, and amateur astronomers, the true gatekeepers of independent celestial data. These were individuals chosen by Eleanor and Finch not for their fame, but for their skepticism, their rigorous methodology, and their deep-seated distrust of government agencies. The initial reaction was universal disbelief, quickly followed by obsessive scrutiny. Data scientists in Berlin spent 12 hours verifying the checksums and cross-referencing the raw Atlas files. A consortium of radio astronomers in Argentina began inputting the refined orbital parameters into their own deep space tracking systems. The sheer volume of verifiable granular data prevented instantaneous dismissal. This wasn't a blurry photo or a single fringe paper. It was thousands of pages of complex, reproducible math, all pointing to the same horrifying conclusion. The key piece of evidence that broke the skepticism was Eleanor's inclusion of the lost infrared data from the 1990s. When combined with the modern Atlas perturbations, the orbital solution locked into place with an unnerving accuracy. A body of 5 to 7 Earth masses moving along the highly inclined 3,600-year path. Commander Thorne and the CCC were now fighting a defensive war on the information front. They couldn't stop the spread of the data, but they could drown it out. Their strategy was multi-pronged, leveraging every resource of state-sponsored information control. First, they launched the data corruption bomb. High-speed bots flooded the internet with thousands of subtly modified versions of data packet 734X. These fake packets contained deliberate minor errors in the calculation of the perihelion distance or the mass estimate, enough to confuse independent researchers and prevent any single unified confirmation of the threat. The goal was to sow doubt. If the numbers don't match, the data is invalid. Second, they activated the trivialization matrix. Official spokespersons from NASA, ESA, and the UK Science Ministry gave coordinated press conferences dismissing the leak as a collection of archived data misinterpreted by disgruntled former academics. They claimed the gravitational signatures were either instrumental noise or the known influence of a cloud of dark matter already accounted for in standard models. Third, they used the media smears against Finch aggressively. Every article discussing the leak prominently featured his photo and the term Nibiru cultist, effectively linking the verifiable science to the fringe mythology, poisoning the well of public discourse. Finch, still in Yorkshire, watched the digital battle unfold on a borrowed laptop. The chaos was exactly what the CCC intended. The average person, exposed to a terrifying scientific claim, followed immediately by conflicting data and character assassination, simply defaults to denial and distrust. He was proud of Eleanor's success, yet devastated by her likely fate. He knew he had to provide the crucial, simplifying narrative, the key that cut through the scientific noise and explained the stakes to the public. He couldn't just rely on the complex math, he needed to contextualize the consequences. He focused his remaining energy on detailing the practical effects of the impending gravitational disturbance. 1. Tectonic shift. The immense gravitational pull would dramatically increase stress on Earth's tectonic plates, leading to a decade of unprecedented seismic activity, culminating in massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, particularly along the Pacific Ring of Fire. 2. Geomagnetic instability. The sheer magnetic field of the inbound planet would interact with Earth's, causing the magnetic poles to weaken and potentially flip. This would leave the planet exposed to solar radiation, destroying satellite infrastructure, rendering all modern communication and navigation systems useless and posing a severe threat to human health. 3. Climate catastrophe. The gravitational stress on the oceans would lead to massive cyclical tidal surges, fundamentally altering coastlines and destroying global food production capabilities located near sea level. Finch wrote his findings in a simple, direct manifesto, designed for immediate public consumption, avoiding the dense jargon of his academic paper. He needed to explain that this wasn't about the Anunnaki. It was about the next wave, the next great catastrophe written in the cosmic clockwork. Despite the concerted effort by the CCC to confuse the data, the integrity of the core information in data packet 734X began to assert itself. The network of independent researchers, separated by geography but united by methodology, started publishing their individual confirmations. From a private observatory in the high desert of Chile, a team confirmed the precise, anomalous trajectory of 3I Atlas and the requirement of a massive unseen shepherd body to maintain that orbit. They published their findings on a secure dark web forum, detailing the process they used to clean the data of the corruption bomb debris planted by the intelligence agencies. A week after the leak, the global media narrative began to crack. While major established news organizations continued to parrot the official denial, independent online journalists and documentary filmmakers started focusing on the verifiable mathematical proofs, circumventing the ad hominem attacks against Finch. The public debate shifted from "Is Finch crazy?" to "Can anyone disprove this math?" The key element that proved devastating to the CCC's denial was the fact that the object 3I Atlas was now moving close enough to be observed visually, though still faintly, by advanced amateur equipment in the southern hemisphere. The coordinates provided in Eleanor's leak allowed these dedicated hobbyists to point their powerful telescopes directly at the specific, predicted area of the sky. A breakthrough came from an astrophotographer in rural New Zealand, an enthusiast who specialized in deep-field infrared photography. He used a custom-cooled CCD camera to capture an image of the region where 3I Atlas was predicted to be. The photograph, released under a non-attribution license, was undeniable. It showed not one, but two faint objects. The smaller, slightly brighter 3I Atlas, and nearby, barely visible against the cosmic background, a much larger, darker object, radiating only in the deep infrared spectrum. The larger object was massive, occupying a noticeable angular size, and positioned precisely where Finch's refined calculations predicted the super-Earth TNOX should be. The image was grainy, ghostly, but definitive. It wasn't the blazing, winged disk of Sumerian legend, but a cold, vast, silent shadow, confirming the mass and the path. The photograph went viral, shocking the public and collapsing the remaining credibility of the official denial. Back at the Citadel, Commander Thorne watched the image of the dark, inbound planet fill his screen. His calculated campaign of misinformation had failed because they underestimated the dedication and sheer volume of the global independent astronomy community. "The cover is blown. Thorne muttered to his assembled team. The physical evidence is now public. We move to Phase 2, managed panic. Phase 2 was the controlled disclosure of limited information designed to steer the public reaction away from true anarchy and towards controlled fear. The narrative would shift from "it doesn't exist" to "it exists," but it's a standard brown dwarf, extremely far away, and poses no immediate threat. They would emphasize the projected 2042 perihelion as distant and manageable. The core goal remained: prevent total societal collapse and maintain the secrecy of the ARCS project, which was still years from completion. Finch, seeing the New Zealand photo, knew his moment had arrived. The math was confirmed. The image was public. He released his manifesto, a final, concise document detailing the consequences, through a secure channel to Miguel in the Canaries, who immediately translated and distributed it globally. Finch's message wasn't one of doom, but of urgency. He stressed that the greatest threat wasn't the planet itself, but the lack of preparedness. He urged communities to focus on localized resource management, reinforcing infrastructure against seismic activity, and developing analog communication systems to bypass the inevitable collapse of the digital grid during the magnetic field shift. He included a final philosophical observation. The Sumerians recorded the catastrophe not to terrify, but to warn. The Anunnaki alert was not a judgment. It was a cosmic memo. The shift in the official narrative was jarringly quick. Within 24 hours of the New Zealand photo going viral, NASA scheduled an emergency press conference. The official story, crafted by the CCC, was presented with a tone of solemn, reluctant confirmation. A high-ranking NASA administrator, Dr. Evelyn Caldwell, appeared pale and serious before the world press. She confirmed the existence of a massive, previously uncatalogued celestial object. They referred to it publicly as Planet Caldwell X, a nod to the commander's strategy of renaming the threat, and acknowledged its orbital properties. However, the narrative was immediately mitigated. This object is a standard brown dwarf companion, not the mythological Nibiru. While it is on an eccentric, highly inclined orbit, our advanced calculations show its closest approach will remain far outside the orbit of Mars, posing absolutely zero risk of impact. The geological disturbances are calculated to be minimal, perhaps only a slight increase in typical seismic background noise. There is no cause for panic. The key phrase, "zero risk of impact," was repeated dozens of times across global news channels. The narrative cleverly accepted the truth of the planet's existence while dramatically downplaying the risk of its gravitational effects. The majority of the public, exhausted by the digital confusion and relieved by the official assurance that the threat was merely astronomical trivia, accepted the new narrative. It was easier to believe a distant, harmless brown dwarf than a returning doomsday planet. Finch observed this psychological phenomenon from his remote B&B. It wasn't just governmental control, it was mass psychological self-protection. The human mind prefers a manageable lie to a terrifying existential truth. But for those who had followed the data, the network of independent scientists, the astrophotographers, and the dedicated followers of the leak, the official statement was simply a refined lie. They knew the mass of the object was far too large for minimal seismic impact at 0.5 AU. They knew the magnetic field interactions were devastating. The war had moved into a new phase. The official deception was now operating in plain sight, backed by the full weight of state authority and media amplification. Those who still preached the severity of the Anunnaki alert were instantly rebranded as dangerous extremists, attempting to cause chaos where the government promised calm. Finch was desperate for information about Eleanor. Using his secure comms line, he contacted a retired colleague in the MI6 structure, a man he had once helped with sensitive orbital trajectory calculations. The news was chillingly clinical. Eleanor Vance was officially registered as detained under the Official Secrets Act and was being held in a high-security facility in the south of England. She was not being tortured, she was being managed. Her disappearance was essential to the government's narrative. The leak was caused by a rogue, unstable operative, now neutralized. Her knowledge, however, was now classified as state property. Finch felt a profound sense of guilt, mixed with steely resolve. Eleanor's sacrifice could not be in vain. He had to keep the true gravity of the situation in the public sphere, even as the official narrative tried to whitewash the threat. He knew that the only way to break through the managed panic was to show the world the physical precursors of the catastrophe. He needed to track the first observable effects of Nibiru's gravitational field, the subtle initial signs of global distress. 3 years passed in the cold, tense reality of managed panic. Nibiru, now officially Caldwell X, continued its silent, inexorable approach. The official line held firm, distant, harmless, nothing to worry about. But the data leak had planted a seed of doubt that refusal to die. Finch, having moved further north into the remote Scottish Highlands, became a silent, isolated observer. Living off the grid, his calculations run entirely by solar-powered, air-gapped systems. He was constantly monitoring independent seismic reports and geomagnetic data, looking for the telltale signs he had predicted. The subtle signs began to emerge. 1. Seismic escalation. Global seismic activity, particularly M6. Earthquakes saw a steady 15% increase, inexplicable by standard models. Independent geologists noted unusual stress patterns in previously dormant fault lines. 2. Magnetic field anomalies. The Earth's magnetic field began to exhibit strange, localized blips, moments of rapid weakening followed by sudden, violent stabilization, causing temporary but severe disruptions in satellite communications and global positioning systems. The CCC blamed unforeseen solar weather. 3. Tidal irregularities. Coastal regions, particularly in the southern hemisphere, began reporting increasingly high, unpredictable supertides that went beyond standard lunar influence. Finch compiled this data into what he called the precursor report. The scientific data, once again, was quietly screaming the truth that the government was desperately trying to silence. The minimal seismic activity promised by Caldwell was turning into a decade of escalating terrestrial instability. The crucial turning point came when the object, TNO-X, crossed the orbit of Saturn. It was now close enough that a new generation of infrared telescopes, including larger consumer models, could begin to detect its faint heat signature. The object was officially moving from the realm of complex physics into simple, observable reality. Finch knew he had one final chance to bypass the managed panic. He needed to deliver a warning that was physically observable, something that didn't require trust in government or complex equations. He travelled covertly back down to a seaside town in Cornwall, a region known for its harsh, rugged coast and its community of traditional fishing folk who distrusted centralized authority. He chose a spot with a direct line of sight to the southern night sky, crucial for sighting the highly inclined object. Using a borrowed, powerful amateur infrared telescope, he began taking his own verifiable images of the inbound object. The images, though still faint, showed the unmistakable, massive form, now visibly accelerating. He wrote his final public letter, addressed not to governments or academia, but to the fishermen, the farmers, and the engineers, the people who dealt with physical reality. He explained that the sea levels were rising not because of climate change alone, but because a gravitational behemoth was pulling at the oceans. He urged them to prepare for the inevitable, a decade of seismic chaos, magnetic collapse, and massive tidal events. His final message was a call to community action. Forget the government. They are building arcs for themselves. We must build our own resilience. Look up, confirm the shadow, and start preparing your families now. Finch released his final warning, along with his personal infrared images, via a local radio enthusiast in Cornwall, who broadcast the message on an encrypted frequency used by independent mariners. From there, the message was picked up and amplified across the remaining independent network. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The fact that an ordinary man, using a commercially available telescope, could now confirm the existence of the massive inbound object shattered the final wall of official denial. People were forced to look up and confront the looming shadow. The public reaction was not the total anarchy the CCC had predicted, but a tense, localized fear coupled with a frantic scramble for self-reliance. Demand for emergency supplies, generators, and seismic reinforcement kits soared globally. The managed panic had turned into an unmanageable, fragmented global realization. Commander Thorne in the Citadel watched the chaos with grim satisfaction. The arcs were nearing completion. The goal of maintaining control until the last possible moment had been partially achieved. They had preserved the structures necessary for the elite to survive, even if the general population now knew the truth. Finch was arrested 3 days later by plainclothes police in Cornwall. He offered no resistance. His mission completed. As he was led away in the back of an unmarked police car, he looked out at the churning grey waves of the Atlantic, a metaphor for the coming tidal surge. He was silent, but internally, he was victorious. He had provided the warning. The Anunnaki alert, spanning 3,600 years of history, was finally heard. Dr. Alistair Finch and Dr. Eleanor Vance faded into the deep security apparatus of the British state, their names replaced by the official narrative of misguided extremists. But the seed was planted. Today, 8 years after the initial data leak, the object Caldwell X is visible to the naked eye in certain parts of the southern hemisphere, a dim, reddish smear against the stellar backdrop. Global seismic activity is at an all-time high, and the world economy teeters on the brink of collapse, stressed by natural disasters and geopolitical tension fueled by the race for resources and safe zones. The official narrative still insists the object is harmless, a cosmic curiosity. But the people, the ones building sea walls and stockpiling supplies, know better. They remember the names Finch and Vance. They remember the terrifying convergence of Sumerian myth and modern physics. The closest approach, the perihelion, is calculated for the year 2042. The only question that remains, echoing across the vast emptiness of the cosmos, is, if the Anunnaki truly are aboard this colossal, inbound vessel, are they returning to save us, or simply returning home? The history books are being rewritten in real time, dictated by the inexorable gravity of a planet that refuses to remain a myth.